United States of crime. Check out what happened on Thursday night in San Jose. 5 masked individuals in gloves and hoodies ransacking a jewelry store, smashing display cases, and running off with whatever goods they could grab. The theft all taking place within 15 seconds. And this scene is not just isolated to California. Florida and North Carolina, by no means blue states, are now dealing with a spike in smash and grabs. And joining us now to discuss is Newsmax insider Bryan Leib, a former Republican candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia in specific. And Bryan, we're seeing what's started in one-party rule cities. It's now spreading across the country. So what can we learn from what's happening in Philadelphia right now?
Logan, good to be with you. Certainly what's happening in Philadelphia is a combination of one-party rule by the Democratic Party and also progressive district attorneys that are funded by George Soros that are more interested in putting criminals back on the streets and actually enforcing the laws and keeping the citizens safe in a town like Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is the birthplace of our country. It's my hometown. As you mentioned, I ran for Congress in Philadelphia. And I want to bring this up. In 2018, when I ran for Congress, there were around 300 homicides for the year. As we sit here today, there have been 513 homicides in the city of Philadelphia. We still have 3 weeks to go. Logan, that represents a 12% increase year over year, and it represents a 60% increase from 2018 when I ran for Congress. So it's very clear what's happening in Philadelphia and other major metropolitan cities around the country where there hasn't been a Republican mayor in 50, 60, 70 years. The criminals in a sense are running the cities.
Well, you make a good point there, Bryan, but there's something else, another layer I kind of want to peel back about, like what specifically is going on with the psyche of Philadelphians. There was a very public incident a couple months back, maybe even a shorter time ago, in which a woman was publicly raped on a public subway, and people just kind of stood there and watched. Now, between the DAs not really cracking down on crime and just this behavior from people, it's kind of like in the Seinfeld episode where everybody's a bystander. Why is everybody a bystander right now? Is there more fear of helping out somebody who is the victim of a crime than there is for people to actually commit a crime itself?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the case that you're bringing up is absolutely horrible and tragic, and sure, it happened in Philadelphia, but I would say it's probably happening all around the country as well. But at the end of the day, I think people are afraid to take action. They're afraid to step up and do the right thing to support someone when they see something happening, because they see what's happening with these criminals. Criminals get into trouble, they get arrested, they're out on the streets, Logan, as you know, within 24 hours. So, I mean, what's happening, with these progressive DAs and coupled with, one-party rule has really just given, a free pass to criminals to just run the cities. I mean, you see what happens in San Francisco and other liberal cities where you have individuals that are going into Rite Aids and CVS's and Walmarts and going in with bags and stealing everything and walking out, and no one's doing anything. I mean, we need to have law and order in this country, and we need to protect the men and women in blue throughout this country that wake up every single day to keep us safe. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that from a lot of Democrats. We are seeing that from the Republicans. But we've got to get tough on crime. And just a final point, really quick, Logan, on Philadelphia and what one-party rule has done to Philadelphia. Sure, homicides, as we mentioned, are through the roof, but we're also talking about poverty that in certain parts of Philadelphia is 40, 50, 60%. 4 out of 10 children in Philadelphia are born into poverty, Logan. That's just completely unacceptable when the national poverty rate is around 11%. So you have rising gun violence, you have homicides that are through the roof, you have criminals getting back on the streets, you have schools that are literally, their infrastructure is crumbling before our eyes, poverty increasing, and oh, by the way, in Philadelphia, there hasn't been a Republican mayor since 1960. So, sure, there's some good Democrats in Philadelphia that are fighting the good fight for their constituents, but, if anyone from Philadelphia is watching, Philadelphia, we've got to put some Republicans in there for once. Let's shake things up a little bit, and I think you'd be surprised about, how many things might change in our city.
Bryan, that's your explanation of rising crime. Here is Press Secretary Jen Psaki's at the White House Thursday.
So when a huge group of criminals organizes themselves and they want to go loot a store, a CVS, a Nordstrom, a Home Depot, until the shelves are clean, you think that's because of the pandemic?
I think a root cause in a lot of communities is the pandemic, yes.
I mean, what do you even say to that response? The pandemic, maybe because it's keeping people confined or keeping them on the internet, where maybe they're seeing ideas that are causing them to act in sometimes heinous ways. She's blaming the pandemic, but as you say, there's more to that.
Well, I mean, haven't things like this been happening all throughout our country before the pandemic started? And I mean, how convenient is it for her to blame the pandemic? What does the pandemic have to do about groups of young men and women that are going into these cities like you're showing the videos right now? What does the pandemic have to do with that? It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that people are taking advantage of these progressive DAs. These criminals know that if they go in there, worst case scenario is they're going to get caught, they're going to get slapped on the wrist, and they're going to be back on the streets in 24 hours. So if that's the message, in a lot of these progressive cities across the country, that's going to be the reason, not the pandemic. And of course, Jen Psaki is, doing the Psaki dodge, as she's so good at doing.
And Bryan, 30 seconds. You ran for Congress in Philadelphia. Should the GOP be dedicating a bigger effort to these inner city communities? You were in the third bluest district when you were running in 2018. Does the GOP need to look there more, given how bad things have gotten?
Yeah, I think they do, and certainly would love to see the national party and state parties, really looking, into cities throughout the country, and especially Philadelphia. I think people really are sick and tired of what's happening, and that's something that I heard quite a bit when I was campaigning and going door to door and knocking on thousands of doors. People are frustrated; they're fed up with the current leadership. But at the end of the day, when you're running a campaign, it takes money to get your message out there, and unfortunately, when you're running in the third most Democratic district in the country, it's tough to get the national donors to want to invest. But I think that's a great question, Logan, and I certainly would love to see some more resources being put into these inner cities, because I think people, they're at their breaking points, and people are desperate for new leadership that really want to put the people first and do the good work. So, I'd welcome that 100%.
Newsmax insider Bryan Leib, thanks for being here tonight.
Of course, and happy 7th night of Hanukkah, Logan.
Happy Hanukkah.